My husband travels for work pretty regularly. It has been that way since early in our marriage, and I adjusted to it a long time ago. The first few times he went away, I found the house a little too quiet, a little too empty in the evenings. But over time, you adapt. You build your own routines around the absences. You get comfortable with the silence. By the time this happened, I was genuinely fine with it. More than fine. I had my own rhythm for when he was away, my own dinner order habits, my own shows to catch up on, my own way of settling into the evenings. I was not the type to work myself up or let my imagination run. I knew the house, I knew its sounds. I was comfortable there in the way that you are only comfortable in a place you have lived in long enough to know its personality. It was a Wednesday evening in late autumn. The kind of evening where it gets dark early and the temperature drops sharply after sunset and the house feels very sealed off from the outside world. I had ordered dinner, Thai food from a place we liked, and eaten in the living room in front of the news the way I often did when my husband was away. No particular reason to sit at the dining table alone. The Samsung Smart TV in the living room was a model we had gotten as a gift maybe 8 or 9 months earlier, newer than anything we had bought ourselves. One of those large flat screens that does everything. Streaming, voice control, video calls. It had a camera built into the top of the frame for the video calling function. A small lens, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, sitting right at the top center of the screen. We had used the video call function maybe twice. It was not something we thought about much. It was just part of the TV. I finished my dinner and took everything through to the kitchen to clean up. I left the news running in the living room the way I always did. I liked the background noise when I was washing up. It made the house feel less empty. I could hear the murmur of it from the kitchen while I rinsed the dishes and loaded the dishwasher. Just the ordinary sound of an ordinary evening. And then, at some point, I noticed the sound had stopped. I registered it the way you register a sound that has been present for a while, suddenly going absent. A shift in the atmosphere of the room rather than a specific noise. I assumed the TV had timed out. It did that occasionally if there was no input for a certain amount of time, just went to a black screensaver. It had happened before. It was not unusual. I finished the dishes, dried my hands, and walked back through to the living room. The screen was not black. I stopped in the doorway. The screen was showing a picture. A wide-angle image in color, bright and clear and high definition. A couch, a coffee table with a remote control on it. A rug I recognized. Cushions I had bought. The particular arrangement of things in a room that you know so well you could describe it from memory. It was my living room. I was standing in the doorway of my own living room, looking at a live, real-time image of the room I was standing in, taken from slightly above, from the top of the TV screen, from the camera. It took me several seconds to fully understand what I was seeing. My brain kept sliding off it the way it does when it encounters something that does not fit any existing category. And then understanding arrived all at once and it hit me like cold water. The camera in the TV had been turned on remotely. Someone somewhere had activated it, and they were looking at my living room. They were looking at me standing in the doorway. I crossed the room in 3 steps and turned the TV off at the set. Not the remote, the physical button on the side of the TV, the one that cuts all power. The screen went black, and the room suddenly felt very different, very small, very exposed. The remote was on the coffee table exactly where I had left it when I went to do the dishes. I had not touched it. I would have known if I had. The dog had been with me in the kitchen the whole time. I could account for every minute of the last half hour with complete certainty. Nobody had been near the TV. Nobody had been in that room. I checked every door in the house. I checked every window. I stood in the center of that living room and I looked at it the way you look at a place that has suddenly revealed itself to be something other than what you thought it was. I was shaking, not dramatically, just that fine, persistent tremor that comes with a certain kind of fear. There was nobody in the house. There was no intruder. There was no physical threat of any kind that I could identify. But someone had been in my TV. Someone had been watching my living room, and I had no way of knowing for how long. A few days later, I was reading the news and I found the story. Samsung Smart TVs, A specific range of models that matched mine almost exactly in description had a confirmed security vulnerability in their firmware. A flaw that allowed unauthorized remote access to the built-in camera. The kind of flaw that does not announce itself. The kind that functions silently, invisibly, with no indicator light, no notification, no way for the person being watched to know it is happening. Samsung issued a statement. They released a patch. The story circulated for about a week and then dropped out of the news cycle the way these things do when there is no single dramatic victim to focus on. But here is the detail that I could not stop thinking about in the weeks and months after. The detail that still sits with me now. The vulnerability had not just appeared. It had existed in those TVs for a significant period of time before anyone publicly identified it. Security researchers who analyzed it later estimated it had been present and potentially exploitable for years. Nobody knew when the first person had figured out how to use it. Nobody knew how many cameras had been accessed. Nobody knew how many living rooms had been quietly observed by someone on the other side of a screen, someone sitting somewhere unknown, watching a stranger in their own home, completely undetected. I thought about all the evenings I had spent in that room. All the nights my husband was away and I was sitting on that couch in my own home feeling completely safe and completely private. All those hours of ordinary life lived in front of a lens that I had no idea was active. I thought about how many times I must have looked directly at that screen, directly at that camera, without knowing there was anyone on the other side of it. I pressed a piece of thick black electrical tape over that camera lens the same night I read the article. I have since put tape over every camera on every device in that room. None of it has ever come off. And whenever I sit in that living room now, even years later, even with every camera covered and every vulnerability long since patched, I am aware of it in a way I was not before. A small, persistent awareness in the back of my mind that the room I'm sitting in has been watched before, that the privacy I felt was not always real. I do not think it ever fully goes away once you know. I have debated whether to share this for a long time. Not because I am embarrassed by it or because I think people won't believe me. I stopped caring about that a long time ago. I share it because it is the kind of thing that changes you in a small but permanent way. The kind of thing that shifts something inside you that never quite shifts back. It happened about 3 years into living in that house. It was a rental in a quiet part of the city, nothing remarkable about it. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, the kind of place that had clearly been built in the 70s and updated just enough to be comfortable without ever feeling truly modern. I had moved in with 2 housemates, both of them people I knew well and trusted completely. The house felt safe. The neighborhood felt safe. I had never once in 3 years felt anything other than completely at ease there. I was not the kind of person who got spooked easily. I had lived alone before, a studio apartment for almost 2 years before this, and the nighttime sounds of an empty space had never bothered me. I was good at being by myself. I actually liked it. I was introverted enough that a night alone in the house with my housemates both out felt like a treat rather than something to be nervous about. That particular night I had done everything right. I had eaten well, I had cleaned up. I had spent a few hours reading, a thick paperback I had been working through slowly for a couple of weeks. By the time I turned the light off, I was genuinely tired in that satisfying way that only comes after a long, quiet evening of doing exactly what you wanted to do. I settled in under the covers and felt the kind of comfortable heaviness that means sleep is coming quickly. I was right on the edge of it, that particular threshold between consciousness and sleep where sounds start to lose their definition and your body has already let go, even if your mind hasn't quite. And then my bedroom door opened. I heard it with complete clarity, even through the fog of near sleep, the handle turning. That specific mechanical rotation I had heard 1,000 times. The faint groan of the hinges. This house was old enough that every door had its own particular sound, and I knew all of them. The soft displacement of air that happens when a door swings into a room. My first thought, my only thought in that moment, was that one of my housemates had come home early. That was the only explanation my half-asleep brain reached for because it was the only explanation that made any sense. One of them must have changed their plans, come back earlier than expected, come upstairs for some reason and accidentally opened the wrong door in the dark. What bothered me, and I want to be clear that this was the only thing that felt off in that first moment before I had seen anything, was that they had not knocked. We were particular about that in our house. All three of us were. It was one of those unspoken rules that had never needed to be discussed because everyone just understood it. You knock before you open a closed bedroom door at night. Always, no exceptions. I started to roll over to say something, to call out my housemate's name, to ask what was going on. And as I turned, I caught a glimpse of the doorway. There was a figure standing there. I want to describe this as carefully as I can because the details matter. It was dark in the room. The kind of dark that a room is when the only light comes from the ambient glow of a streetlight through curtains. Enough to see shapes. Enough to make out the outline of things. Not enough to see clearly. The figure was standing in the doorframe. Just standing there, still, not moving, not saying anything. Head, shoulders, the shape of a body filling the lower half of the doorframe. And it was facing into the room, facing toward me. My brain was still trying to make it a housemate, still trying to find the innocent explanation. I was about to say a name. I had my mouth open. And then the figure moved. It turned quickly, suddenly, with a kind of snapping urgency that was completely at odds with how still it had been, and walked away down the hallway, fast, the footsteps rapid and receding. That was what broke through everything. Not the figure, not the darkness. Not even the fact that no one had knocked. It was the way it moved when it realized I had seen it. That sudden, urgent retreat. That was not the movement of a housemate who had accidentally opened the wrong door and was embarrassed about it. That was not the movement of someone who had been sleepwalking or confused in the dark. That was the movement of someone who had been caught, who had not expected me to be awake, who needed to be somewhere else immediately. I was out of bed before I had consciously decided to move. I turned on every light in my room. I stood in the center of the room for a moment and just listened. Complete silence. The house was absolutely silent. I checked the hallway. Nothing. Empty in both directions. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked the other bedroom on the same floor. Empty. I went downstairs and checked every room. Empty. I checked the front door. Locked. Deadbolt engaged. I checked the back door. Locked. I went around every window on the ground floor and checked each one individually. Every single one closed and latched. Then I called my housemates. The first one answered on the second ring from his parents' house 3 hours away. He had been there since the afternoon. He was confused by my call and a little worried by how I sounded. The second one took a couple of rings to answer. She was at a friend's apartment on the other side of the city, had been there since early evening, was not planning on coming back until the morning. Neither of them was anywhere near the house. Neither of them had been near the house all evening. I sat in the living room with every single light in the house turned on and I did not sleep. I sat upright on the couch and I watched the doors and I waited for morning. When the sun finally came up and the light through the windows made everything ordinary again, I felt the relief of it physically, like something releasing in my chest. I never found out who was standing in my doorway that night. I never found out how they got in. I never found out where they went or how they left without me finding a single open window or unlocked door. I never found a single piece of evidence that anyone had been in that house at all. But the image of that figure in the doorway, the shape of it in the dim light, the absolute stillness of it, and then the way it moved when I saw it, that has never left me. Not in all the years since. Not once. I lock my bedroom door every single night now, even when I am alone in the house, even when every other door and window is already locked, especially then. I want to start by saying that I am not someone who scares easily. I grew up in a pretty normal household. Nothing strange ever happened to us. No ghost stories, no unexplained events, nothing that ever made me question what was real and what wasn't. I was a pretty grounded kid, practical, the kind of person who always looked for a logical explanation before jumping to anything else. So when I tell you what happened that Tuesday, I need you to understand that I have spent years looking for the logical explanation. I have turned it over in my mind hundreds of times. I have gone through every possible scenario, every alternative, every rational reason for what my brother and I heard that afternoon. I have never found one. My brother and I were both home from school that day. We weren't skipping. We were genuinely sick. Nothing serious. Just that particular kind of end-of-season cold that makes you feel too rough to sit in a classroom, but not quite sick enough to feel like you're actually dying. Our mum had looked us both over that morning, felt our foreheads, and decided it wasn't worth sending us in. She went to work as usual. Our stepdad went to work as usual. It was just me and my brother in the house for the day. By late morning, we had already burned through most of what there was to watch on TV. Neither of us felt bad enough to sleep, but neither of us felt well enough to do much of anything either. So somewhere around noon, we migrated down to the basement to mess around with our miniatures in the craft room. It was something we did sometimes when the weather was bad or we had nothing else going on. It was comfortable down there in a strange way, even though the basement itself was mostly unfinished. Concrete floors, bare cinder block walls, a single overhead bulb that flickered occasionally when the heat kicked on. The craft room was carved out of one corner of it. Just 4 walls and a door, nothing fancy, but it had a table and good light, and all our stuff was in there. We settled in and got absorbed in what we were doing. My brother was working on painting a set of figures he had been putting off for weeks. I was sorting through a box of parts I had been meaning to organize for months. We were talking, listening to music quietly through a small speaker, completely at ease. I remember thinking it was actually kind of a nice day despite feeling rough. Just the two of us in the basement with nothing to worry about. I don't know exactly how long we had been down there when we heard it. The front door unlocked. I want to be precise about that because it matters. It was not the sound of a door being pushed open. It was not the sound of someone rattling the handle. It was the specific, unmistakable mechanical sound of a key being inserted into the deadbolt and turned. That particular click and thunk that a deadbolt makes when it disengages. A sound that both my brother and I had heard literally thousands of times growing up in that house. The sound of someone coming home. We both heard it at exactly the same moment. My brother stopped what he was doing. I looked up from the box. We looked at each other across the table without saying a single word. Then the door opened, then it closed. The sound of the latch catching, the slight vibration that ran through the house the way it always did when the front door was pulled shut. And then footsteps. Slow, measured, unhurried. The distinctive sound of someone walking in hard-soled shoes across the foyer tile. That particular sharp click that you only get from that specific kind of floor. It was a sound I could have identified in my sleep. I had heard my stepdad come home at lunch before. This sounded exactly like that. The footsteps crossed the foyer at a normal pace and moved into the kitchen. A cabinet opened, then another. The tap turned on. The sound of water running. I was confused, but I was not scared yet, not even close. My brain had already assembled an explanation before I had even consciously started looking for one. My stepdad had come home for lunch. He did that sometimes. Not often, maybe once every few weeks, but it happened. We were down in the basement with music on, so he probably didn't even know we were home. That was the explanation. That was obviously the explanation. I picked up my phone and called my mum. Looking back, I am not sure exactly why. Maybe some part of me that I was not fully listening to yet wanted someone else to know what we were hearing. I told her I thought my stepdad had come home for lunch. There was a pause on the other end. She said she had just gotten off the phone with him. He was at the office. He had been in a meeting all morning and had just come out of it when she called him about something else entirely. I told her I could hear someone upstairs, that we had heard the front door unlock with a key, that we had heard footsteps. Another pause, longer this time. She told me to hold on. She called him on her other phone while I waited on the line. I sat at that table in the craft room in the basement and I listened to the silence above me and I waited. He was at work. He had not left. He was sitting at his desk. He had been there all morning and had not come home. And then my mom's voice changed. It is hard to describe exactly how it changed. It was not panic. She was too controlled for that. But the careful, measured calm that she shifted into was somehow worse than panic would have been. It was the voice of someone who had just understood something and was trying very hard not to communicate how much it frightened them. She told us to stay in the basement, stay quiet, Do not go upstairs. Do not open the craft room door. She told us she was calling my stepdad right now and he was leaving the office immediately. She told us she was going to stay on the phone with me. My brother was watching my face. He had only heard my side of the conversation, but he had understood enough. We both stood up slowly and I pulled the craft room door until it was almost completely shut, leaving just the thinnest crack of light from the basement bulb outside. We stood on either side of the table and we did not make a sound. Upstairs, the tap turned off. The silence that followed was one of the most uncomfortable silences I have ever experienced in my life. It pressed down on that basement like something physical. My brother and I stood completely still. I had my phone pressed to my ear with my mom's breathing on the other end of the line. None of us spoke. Then the footsteps started again, moving from the kitchen toward the staircase. The same slow, deliberate pace, not hurrying, not searching, just moving. One step at a time up the stairs to the second floor, and then silence again. My stepdad arrived faster than I would have thought possible. He must have driven well above the speed limit the entire way because he was there within minutes. He came in through the front door. We heard him call our names immediately, his voice tight in a way I had never heard from him before. And we came up from the basement. He went through that house the way I imagine a soldier clears a building, room by room, closet by closet. Every space large enough to conceal a person. Both floors, the basement again, the garage. He checked every window. He checked every door. Nobody was there. Not a single window was open or unlocked. Not a single door was unsecured. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere on the property. There was no sign that anyone had left through any exit other than the front door. And the front door had been locked when my stepdad arrived. He had used his own key to get in. We never heard anyone come back down those stairs. Whatever went up, we never heard it come down again. My stepdad called the police. They came and did their own search and found exactly what he had found. Nothing. No explanation. No evidence of any intruder. They took a report and left. Nobody has ever been able to explain it. Not the police, not my parents, not anyone we have ever told the story to. There is no version of events that accounts for all the details simultaneously. The key, the footsteps, the tap, the disappearance. Every explanation falls apart somewhere. I am an adult now. I have not lived in that house for years, but I will tell you this. To this day, whenever I am somewhere quiet and I hear footsteps in a part of the building where nobody should be, my stomach drops in a way that never fully went away, and I never go to investigate alone.